This lecture is a continuation of the last one, and this is going to be more specifically focused on some of the political developments of the early republic. So, the early years of the United States in the last few years of the Revolution and in the years following the victory and the success, winning of the independence. This is a lot more about the nuts and bolts, as I mentioned in the last one, of setting up the government, the actual documents, the creation of things like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, things that are designed to help protect the individual and make this a truly Republican system of government. So, starting right off, we're talking about what is the system of government here. This is something that the founders wrestled with right from the get-go. They knew what they wanted, but actually putting it into place was an entirely different story. They know they want not a monarchy. They know they want to have no king, but that still leaves a lot of choices. And right from the beginning, in 1777, not too long after the war began, not too long after the Declaration of Independence, the colonies, the colonies who are now considering themselves as states, they draft the first form of government to unite them. During the War for Independence, they know that they need to work together. And the first system of government that they have amongst one another between the states is a governing system known as the Articles of Confederation. The Articles were drafted in 1777 by the American Congress, and their whole entire point, really, was to just have some governing body that was a written, codified agreement to coordinate the colonies, to coordinate the war, to make sure that they have an agreement. It's called a firm league of friendship. It's all about mutual defense. The Articles of Confederation is a governing system, but it's much more of just an agreement to work together and how they want to work together. It's not really a blueprint for running a nation. It doesn't have all of the things that a constitution would have. It basically says that we're all going to work together, but one of the quotes from it is that, quote, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right. So the only thing that centralizes them, the only central government part of this, is that the had to agree to, a leader would help all of the states here would have to agree to declare war, appoint military officers, or do anything when it comes to foreign governments. Everything else was up to the individual states themselves. The articles say that those are the only things they can't do, they have to agree on. Everything else is up to the states individually. It's mostly an agreement of this firm league of friendship during the conflict. And they're definitely doing that on purpose. They want a very weak central government uniting them because they're absolutely terrified that if they come together and have one central power, that that power will become a king or a monarch. They've seen how badly that can go. They are determined to let it not happen again. And the Articles of Confederation are purposefully weak for that end. They do not want a king, they do not want a central government. They want 13 states doing their own thing that have a couple things in common that work together for a common goal of being free from Britain. They're united by similar principles, but they want most power to lie within the states. You do not want a centralized government, a president, a king, a monarch, whoever, because they're just so absolutely petrified, shaking in their boots, that that person will turn into a tyrant, like they had witnessed in England. So the Articles of Confederation, they're signed, they're drafted during the war. The states agree that they're going to work together to fight this war, but they're going to maintain their own autonomy, each state. In 1781, when it becomes clear that they're going to win this, Cornwallis surrenders in 1781. Yay, we're going to win. Takes a little while for the treaty to hash out. Takes till 1783, but victory is on the horizon. They decide the Articles of Confederation, good enough. This is going to be the governing system that they're going to adopt because it's been working so far, and they still like the idea of keeping it weak. They like the idea of making sure that they are not going to have a king or a monarch. Okay, first question. What was the purpose of the Articles of Confederation? However, it becomes very clear moving forward with this new country that yeah, they're really weak, and it turns out that's a problem. They were weak to begin with, as a purpose as purpose built, so that you didn't have a tyrant or a king take over this new country. But it turns out you actually do need central leadership. The Articles of Confederation suffer from a lot of weaknesses, and that's a big one of them. There is no central leadership. It makes it very difficult to get anything done when you don't have someone who speaks for all of the states. You have 13 state delegates trying to work together, and a lot of the Articles of Confederation said that it had to be unanimous. You could barely sometimes get three people to agree on something. Can you imagine 13 to make any decisions? Nothing happens. It's deadlocked all the time. There's also no power to enforce laws. There's nothing built into the Articles of Confederation that tell you how or why to or what laws to enforce. So there's nothing to make sure that the states actually follow those few rules that they were given not having to about having to have a central leadership, having to agree to like declare war on Spain or something. I mean, that was something that had to be done at this federal level, at the central level. But what's preventing the state of Georgia from declaring war on Spain? There's nothing to enforce that law. The few laws they had, they could barely even enforce. There's also, because there's no rules, no laws here, there's no way for authorities to collect taxes or regulate trade. And part of it is because they didn't really want to have that in the their governing document, because that's part of the reason why there had been so much turmoil with Britain is it was disagreements over taxation and regulation of the economy. So they were trying to avoid putting that in their governing documents in the first place, but whoops, it turns out you do kind of need tax money to run a government. They're pretty broke after the war and they're suffering from this. There's also no good method for implementing any changes in the Articles of Confederation. They anything had to be unanimous. So to make a change, even if you wanted to change something little, every single one of those 13 state delegates had to agree. Just like enforcing or creating laws, it's very difficult to get anything done, and most things get pretty deadlocked during this. So the Articles of Confederation get really just beat down. This little doodle here, I love this one. It's so sad, but they're very weak. They're not a good way to run a government. They're an agreement to be friends and to make certain decisions together, but it's hard to make those decisions together when there's no laws, there's no teeth, there's nothing to enforce it, and there's no one central power that's helping speak for all of the states. Next question here. Why were the Articles of Confederation weak and how were they weak? So talk about their weaknesses for me. Something that will very viscerally illustrate how weak the Articles of Confederation are and why they really need something better for regulation becomes apparent with an event known as Shays' Rebellion that begins in summer of 1786, a few years after the Treaty of Paris, and goes on for almost a year. Shays' Rebellion really illustrates the need for political change. And what happens with Shays' Rebellion is that a lot of states, Massachusetts included, have been taxing people in their state very heavily to help pay for the costs of the American Revolution. They're in debt. They still owe people money. They owe other countries money um, for having fought the revolution. And because there's no real rules or laws in place about taxation, they can kind of do whatever they want. And Massachusetts ends up very heavily taxing its farmers who have a lot of land in the hopes that taxing them will help raise money to help pay off the debts of the revolution. And what happens though is a lot of these farmers can't pay the taxes. Yes, they have a lot of land, but some of them are in debt as well. And a lot of farmers, the taxes are so high they can't afford to pay them. If they can't pay their taxes, the state of Massachusetts will take their land. And in 1786, one farmer, Daniel Shays, he gets very upset that this is happening and kind of leads a small militia unit to attempt to prevent the Massachusetts government from seizing land from these indebted farmers. Shays himself was a veteran of the Revolution, and he felt that this heavy taxation by the state of Massachusetts was a violation of the principles he had fought for. No taxation without representation, and just heavy taxation as a incursion on one's own liberty. So Shays leads this rebellion. He leads a lot of other farmers and supporters of his cause. They spend several months throughout 1786 and 1787 harassing government officials. They try to rob the state armory. They're causing all sorts of chaos. The state governor has to be dispatched to put them down. They capture Daniel Shays. He's arrested. He's almost hanged for his crimes for treason and this uprising, but he is pardoned mostly because he was a very distinguished veteran in the revolution. The real important outcome of Shays' rebellion, the two most important ones, was that it showed, first and foremost, that you really do need a uniform system of taxation applied evenly throughout all of the land. You can't have Massachusetts heavily taxing whoever it wants. You can't have Massachusetts having crazier taxes than somewhere like Vermont or New York or anywhere like that. You really have to have something in place, the federal taxation system that is evenly applied in some capacity. The second and probably most important outcome of Shays' Rebellion is that it shows that the Articles of Confederation are way too weak. They do not work. You need central leadership, you need some type of taxation system, and you need something that can adapt quickly to changes. Shays' Rebellion happens quickly. There's a rebellion going on. How do you stop it when nobody can even agree on what to do? So there is a push to have a document that's more malleable, that's more open to being changed as it sees the need arise. The Articles of Confederation are shown very heavily to be insufficient at governing a nation, and it's Shays' rebellion and anything and the actions taken by Shays that show this in a very visceral way. You also simply just need a stronger federal government available to put down uprisings. There needs to be something in place, some type of government system, some type of militia or army to help out when there is instability in a state. And that's what Shays' Rebellion demonstrates very heavily. So the next question here is what caused Shays' Rebellion and why was Shays' Rebellion so important? What were the outcomes of the rebellion? So, Shays' Rebellion. It graphically demonstrates that the Articles of Confederation are not working. People are rebelling now in this new country because their government system is insufficient. It shows that a change needs to happen, and not too long after Shays' Rebellion comes to a conclusion, only a few months after it, in May 1787, 55 delegates from 12 of the 13 states meet in Philadelphia with the sole goal at this constitutional convention of figuring out something else to put in place to replace the non-workable, weak little Articles of Confederation. They're not cutting it anymore. Before I get into this, someone probably is thinking, 12 of the 13 states. What's the 13th state? What's going on? Why aren't all 13 of them there? What's happening? The 13th state was Rhode Island. They wanted no part of this. They felt that the Articles of Confederation were just fine. They were the most terrified of changing the Articles of Confederation, putting someone in power that might turn into a king. So Rhode Island wanted no part of this. They did not send any delegates. They became known as Rogue Island because of this and would kind of maintain a reputation for being kind of outliers ever since. So 12 states send delegates. They meet in Philadelphia. They are there to hash out a new system of government that will be more workable than the Articles of Confederation, that will solve the problems of the Articles that Shays' Rebellion showed so graphically. Their goal here is to create a centralized government that will not turn into a monarchy or a dictatorship. So, what they want to do with the Constitutional Convention is replace the Articles of Confederation with something that allows for a centralized government that has a president or a leader, but do it in a way so that that person doesn't become a tyrant or a king. Sounds like a challenge. So they adopt one of their favorite old principles right out of the Enlightenment, and that is separation of powers. They agree at the Constitutional Convention that to have a centralized government, you need to put checks and balances on it. And they create three branches of government. You're going to have the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary branches, which we still have. That is to really put controls on the office of president and put controls on all of the branches, really, to make sure one doesn't ever overpower the other. As it shows here, this is kind of how a very simplistic version of how the checks and balances work, how there are safeguards in place to make sure that each one of these does not become overly powerful. You know, uh, the president can veto things, but Congress is the one that makes the laws. Um, the Supreme Court can rule on legislation. It all checks out to make sure that not a single branch ever becomes tyrannical. And that's kind of what they agree on at the Constitutional Convention. That's their way of solving the problems that they were faced with. They had the problems of a weak government, but also the problem of what if we create a really strong government with one central power and that person becomes a king. So this is the way they solve both problems in one swoop here. We will create a strong government, but one that has safeguards built in. Okay, next question. What was the goal of the Constitutional Convention? While they are writing a constitution, while they are writing this new blueprint for how to run a government, the Articles of Confederation was just an agreement. They need a blueprint. They need laws. They need a centralized government. They need something written down, rules that will apply to all of the states, rules that will unite them as well. Naturally, while they're having this conversation about what laws they want to codify, what they want to make the blueprint of the United States, the law of the land, while they're discussing this at the Constitutional Convention, the topic of slavery naturally comes up because this is something they've been wrestling with for quite some time. There are a lot of American politicians that are concerned about the role slavery will play in the United States. Some of them want it banned and some of them want it protected. You can kind of guess who wants each one. The North has more abolitionist sentiment. They think slavery is one of the quotes is that it contaminates the glorious fabric of American liberty. Others in the South, the southern states, feel that it is so vital to the economy that they will be destroyed if it's taken away. They will be the ones to suffer. It's all well and good for the North to go on about morality, but the reality in the South is that they need enslaved labor. South Carolina, in particular, is very concerned. The state of South Carolina wants to see slavery protected in the Constitution. They want to make sure that it can never be banned. So you've got two very different ideas about what to do with slavery in the new nation. And the fear still remains in these politicians that if they are too aggressive with getting rid of slavery, that they will lose the South. They will never be able to ratify or pass or agree on a constitution, and they'll be stuck with the Articles of Confederation forever, and nothing will ever get done, and the nation will fall apart. So there's a lot resting on this question. So the delegates at the Constitutional Convention are really chewing over this idea about slavery. What do we do? We have to compromise. Banning it outright will lose the support of the southern states. They will never agree on anything. They will become their own country. We will not be united anymore. There's a lot of doom and gloom painted into this story here. So a compromise needs to be arrived at. So to get the South to agree to ratify or pass the Constitution, to win them over, they agree on several things regarding slavery in the new laws. One of the compromises that the delegates agree on at the Constitutional Convention is they promise that they will not put anything in the Constitution that would abolish the importation of slaves. They said, we promise we will not make slavery illegal or abolish it. But they did put a little stipulation in there that in 20 years from the ratification of the Constitution, they would ban importation. So they were not going to ban slavery itself, but in 20 years, they were going to ban importation from Africa. And indeed, they do. 20 years later, in 1808, importation of enslaved labor from Africa becomes illegal. Slavery itself is still in place. The United States simply has to rely on natural production. So the reproduction of enslaved Americans will be what fuels slave labor. They have to populate it themselves. You have to rely on that domestic growth. So they compromise over that. They promise they're not going to ban slavery, but they eventually do ban importation. So that's compromise number one. The second compromise that they agree on to kind of win the South over and win their support, they want them to vote yes on this Constitution, is something known as the Three-Fifths Law. And that was a kind of a prize for the South because they agreed that three out of every five enslaved individual would be counted towards population, and that would be that calculates how many representatives you get. Because the South was arguing, hey, if representation in the central government is based on population, we have a huge population down here. Yeah, they can't vote, but they're people. They're down there. We want them to count as part of our state's population and get more representatives in like Congress and Senate. And a lot of people said, well, they're not even allowed to vote. How in the world, why in the world are you counting them as population? That doesn't count. So they agree to count for every five enslaved people, that will count as three people in the population that add to how many representatives you get, because that's how representation works. You get more representatives the higher population you have. State with a huge population will have a lot more representatives. They will have a lot more opportunities to elect people to federal positions because it's seen as a way to represent them better. You know, you have like a state like California has a lot more representatives than Nebraska because California has a higher population. So they agree to count some of the enslaved population towards the overall population count, whereas in a free state, everybody just, every single free person counts as a person. This little doodle here represents it pretty well, I think. So it's known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. All right, we're not going to count everybody, but we'll count a few just to make the South happy. And that will buy the South several more representatives in the federal government at the federal level. The final agreement that the South gets to win them over to please, please, please support this Constitution. Please, we all have to agree on this. We need a majority of agreeing to make the Constitution the law of the land. The other agreement the South gets is something known as the Fugitive Slave Clause. And this is a law that says that if enslaved people in the South run away to a free area, they still have to be returned. You have to, they can be caught and returned back to a slave state, even if they make it to a state where slavery is not practiced, or even some states where they have banned it themselves and made it illegal in their own state. You still have to return them to a state of bondage in the South. And there was more of a pressing need at the moment to pass a constitution and have a law of a land. So more people were willing to kind of make these compromises just to get it passed and figured we will continue this debate once we have a workable form of government on the books. We want to pass the Constitution. We need to make some compromises regarding slavery in order to facilitate that, with the hope by many anti-slavery advocates that eventually the institution could slowly be phased out. All right, next question. What compromises were made regarding slavery in order to ratify the Constitution? All right, they finally do it. Woohoo! Those compromises work. They get the support of the states, and they do by 1788 ratify that Constitution. What does ratify mean? It means everybody agrees to be held accountable to it. They pass it. They agree that this will be the law of the land that everybody answers to. The Constitution is the governing system of the United States. But there is still debate going on about federal power. This is going to animate so much of the United States government and so much political discourse. I can't even begin to describe it to you. There's still debate over how much power each part of the nation should have. There is seen as power resting in two places in the United States. You have the states and the federal government. So you have each individual state and you have a government that represents them all. Where should there be more power? Should the power rest with the states, or should the most power in decision making go with that central overarching government? That debate is still going on today. It has never been solved. I don't know if it ever will be. It starts very quickly, even before the Constitution is ratified. This is something that will constantly permeate the political atmosphere of the United States, and it starts to lead to some of the first political parties. There are two main groups of political thought in the early United States. They fall into either being a federalist or an anti-federalist. A federalist is someone who likes the stronger central government. They like the stronger federal power, more power to the president, more decision making in that larger body. They feel that that allows for a more decisive, strengthened United States on the world scale. And on the opposite side, you have anti-federalists. You can probably see where they take their name from. They don't want that big federal government, the strong centralized government, to be too powerful. They're terrified that too much power to the president, to the federal government, will result in tyranny. It will become a monarchy. That person will become a king. They want more power to rest with the states. They think states should be supreme. The federal government, the central government should be very weak. It should only be involved in like making war and printing money. That's about it. Everything else should be at the discretion of the states. They should have much more autonomy. And by giving power to the states, that's how you will prevent a monarchy. That's how you will keep a stable government. So there's a lot there even up to the ratification, post ratification, there's so much debate between Federalists and Anti-Federalists about which which place should power lie. The one thing they really can both agree on is who they want to fill the role of executive, and that is George Washington. It's pretty much unanimous. Nobody says no to George. He is very popular. He's a war hero. He was a general. They love him. Look at him. Look at that painting. That is George Washington. He is the first president, and he is chosen unanimously. So George is put in office. He is the first president. That's why he's on money. You don't get that position by doing nothing. And two, he is very popular, and nobody really questions George Washington's political acumen or his loyalty to the United States. But people start to worry that, okay, we know George Washington isn't going to do anything bad. They love him. He's beloved, probably the most popular president ever, especially at the time, most leader at the time. There's still a concern that when George Washington has to leave office and go away, what if somebody bad takes his place or somebody that abuses the office? And the Anti-Federalists are the biggest advocates for this. They think that there's still not enough protection for individuals. There's still not enough protections for people with the way the Constitution is. So, to please them, in 1791, a Bill of Rights is added to the Constitution that extra articulates the protections of civil liberties for every single American. The Bill of Rights is for you. Yes, you, every single one of you, and me too. It's for everybody. It's to protect your individual citizen rights and help rein in any abuses of power or or stepping on any kind of personal liberties that the federal government might potentially do. This is an extra safeguard for the American people. A lot of these things are really trying to put on the books protections for individual rights. Several, like the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, really, they're the first 10 amendments. They really outline some of the rights we know and love. First Amendment, freedom of petition, freedom of assembly. Right, Second Amendment right to bear arms. The Third Amendment, the most important amendment. I will argue this until I am blue in the face. The Third Amendment's the most important. You don't have to quarter soldiers in your house. Constitutionally, you can tell troops to go sleep outside. That is a 100% constitutional thing for you to say. But seriously, they are codifying, putting down on paper rights that you will enjoy. Things like right to a fair trial, right to a right in civil cases, no unjust punishment, things that protect people if there is a bad ruler in place. It's something that they are also going to be beholden to follow things like freedom of speech and freedom of press. But things are so before I get excited about the Third Amendment, as you could tell. Before I get too excited about anything else, next question. Why was the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution in 1791? It doesn't solve all the problems. There are still political divisions in place, and there are still political upheavals that occur in the early republic, despite how many times they try to solve them. We have the Constitution, that should solve the problem. We've got a blueprint, Still worried. We have a Bill of Rights. There's still issues. There's a lot of political divisions because, again, they're not solving and might not ever solve that question of who has what power and exactly how should the government be run. It's a constant process, a constant evolution. Some of the earlier political divisions in the 1790s, during George Washington's presidency, one politician, Alexander Hamilton, he has an idea that he wants to create a new financial plan to help make the United States powerful. He suggests having a national bank. He becomes Secretary of the Treasury and hopes that having a national bank will allow the United States to become a financial power in the global stage. He wants the United States to have a system of credit. He wants them to be able to trade with big European nations and become very financially prominent. And this leads to a lot of debates about what kind of country does the United States want to be. Politicians like Thomas Jefferson are really going to disagree with this. They're going to say, no, we don't really want to be a fancy banking nation. This is supposed to be a nation of farmers and small government. And there is a lot of tension over that. Another political issue that will arise to show that, things aren't perfect in this early republic is in 1794 with the Whiskey Rebellion. This stems from Alexander Hamilton's plan, part of Hamilton's plan to raise money to make the United States have a treasury, have a little bit in the coffers there, was to place a tax on whiskey. And this ends up aggravating a lot of farmers, particularly in Pennsylvania, because that's where they're growing a lot of wheat and corn that you distill liquor from. So they felt that this was a violation of everything to be taxed. So in 1784, in the 1780s, 1790s, there starts to be an uprising of protest against tax collectors trying to collect the taxes from the Pennsylvania farmers. Um, the whiskey rebels do things like they create little militias. They start using violence and intimidation tactics to prevent officials from being able to collect the tax. And it really comes to a head in July of 1794 when a group of distillers attack a U.S. Marshal who is trying to collect taxes. They end up gathering together about 500 armed men and they lead another attack on the home of a tax collector. And it becomes so violent, this disagreement over taxation and the desire to not pay the whiskey tax, that George Washington himself comes out and leads in troops to end the rebellion. And he does it. He's successful. He takes his white horse. I don't know how apocryphal that is or not, but there he is on it. And he leads 13,000 troops personally to go out and end the rebellion. This is the only time the president has actually ever, any president ever, has actually acted as commander in chief, head of the military, and gone out on a military mission. No one else has ever done that. The president is technically head of the military, so could, if so chose, go on a horse and lead a military expedition. George Washington does it though. He goes out, he puts the rebellion down, and then goes back to the White House. So it's a pretty interesting political moment, but it does show that this young nation can deal with dissent. It also shows that dissent is happening. Not everybody is 100% happy all the time. Okay, next question. What was the Whiskey Rebellion? Now, George Washington was adamant that he did not want political parties to emerge when he left office. He's kind of the only president to really not fall into a political party. He said, please, that will destroy the country. Political parties, political disagreement will destroy our country. If you have time, I highly, highly recommend please read George Washington's farewell speech when he voluntarily chooses to end his tenure in office. It's a great rhetoric, it's a great example and exploration of political parties. But Washington leaves office. He says he begs everybody to please not adopt political parties. The second he's out the door, they adopt political parties. And, he says, please no parties while I'm gone, but nobody listens to him. The next president who is elected after Washington is John Adams, who is now going to begin the tradition of political parties. Adams had been he was a Federalist, and a Federalist is, as I mentioned when I was examining this, Federalist is someone who supports the strong national centralized government. And I like this graph because it really shows the difference between these two political parties. You had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists very quickly try to adopt a new name. They call themselves the Democratic Republicans because in their mind, Anti-Federalist just sounds kind of negative. So they become the Democratic Republicans. So you have these two groups, and this is just where the political lines are drawn. Federalists want that strong national government. They want things like a bank and merchants, manufacturers. They view America's destiny as one of being very cosmopolitan, big cities, fancy, competitive on the world stage. They want a more, so they support that national bank, and they also feel that the Constitution should be a lot more open to interpretation. The Anti-Federalists, aka Democratic Republicans, are the total opposite. They want states to reign supreme power-wise. They want the nation to be more agrarian, more agricultural. They want them to be, a nation of self-sufficient farmers. Yes, beautiful, wonderful, like little family farms, like Massachusetts, New England style Puritan families everywhere. And they like a more strict interpretation of the Constitution, where the law of the land is the letter of the letter of the law, what have you. So those two different sentiments, Federalist, Anti-Federalist, that were present in the debate during the ratification of the Constitution, become the first political parties, despite poor George Washington's ardent pleas to not do this. Okay, next question. What is the difference between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, aka the Democratic Republicans? I just think it's a mouthful. Anti-Federalist rolls off the tongue a little easier. All right. So, John Adams, here he is. He is president number two, and he's not popular. Ooh, it's not a good start for the new nation. They had George Washington, things were smooth sailing, except for the Whiskey Rebellion. We're not going to talk about that anymore. Adams' presidency is fraught with issues. Adams is not quite the charismatic, timeless hero that George Washington was. He has a lot of issues. He faces a lot of opposition. He's considered kind of stubborn and self-important to people who knew him. They kind of felt he was a bit of a bore. And he ends up being besieged by political criticism during his tenure in office. Because of this, because he is facing so much criticism, Adams becomes afraid that that criticism is going to destroy the unity of the United States, that it's going to affect his authority and it's going to hurt the country. And Adams is also convinced that a lot of this criticism being launched at him is coming from recent immigrants, so new arrivals to the United States who don't know anything about the political system. They don't know enough to make educated decisions, and they don't know enough to realize that Adams is right. So you can kind of see why people thought he was a stubborn, self-important individual. So Adams, because he's just faced by all of this, these kind of like nasty cartoons and all of these strongly worded things appearing in newspapers and pamphlets that call him a fool, he decides in 1798, for the good of the nation, to stop all of this slander, really, as he felt it was. He passes the Alien and Sedition Acts, which say that the Alien Act part of it, says that there needs to be a much longer time to naturalize an immigrant into a citizen and prevent them from voting right away. Again, because he thought that it was recent immigrants that were stirring up all of this criticism of him. And the Sedition Act made it illegal to publish something critical of the government. So you could not publish or speak out against the government. And again, he felt it was because people were trying to incite chaos and slandering him. and that those seditious acts were threatening the union and stability of the United States. Of course, a lot of people immediately jumped up and said, whoa, 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 this is a violation of the First Amendment. You can't pass a sedition act and prevent people from criticizing you. That's freedom of the press and freedom of speech. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison hate John Adams. They hate him, especially Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson hates John Adams. Thomas Jefferson is the first one to jump up and say, whoa, that's a violation of the First Amendment, my friend, or my enemy. And Jefferson and Adams both draft resolutions that are adopted by Virginia, states of Virginia and Kentucky, so hence they get the name, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, that are formal resolutions declaring the Sedition Act as unconstitutional. So it's a legal recourse. It's kind of an official document saying that we these politicians, we these states find the Alien and Sedition Acts unconstitutional. They're adopted the resolution to disagree, to not follow the Alien and Sedition Act is adopted by Virginia and Kentucky. And it just shows how unpopular that John Adams was, that he had a lot of political disagreements. He had a lot of political enemies. He made some questionable decisions, like passing the Alien and Sedition Act. It's so unpopular that entire states passed resolutions talking about how much they hate it. All right, next question. What were the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? What did they oppose? Because that's what they were. They were formal oppositions to this. So John Adams, unpopular guy. I don't know. Is he on money? I can't remember. I have to look at my money and see. I don't know if he's on money. You have to be really popular to get on money. John Adams is super unpopular in the year of his re-election. He does not win re-election. You know who wins the next election? His arch nemesis, Thomas Jefferson. Yes, the Thomas Jefferson presidency. He is the next president. He takes office officially in 1801, and there's a lot of important stuff that unfolds during Jefferson's time in office. Jefferson is an anti-federalist. He is a Democratic Republican, if you want to get fancy. And Jefferson has very different ideas from Adams. You know, Adams had been a Federalist. He wants a strong national government, a bank, merchants. Jefferson, opposite. Power to the states, and he wants an agrarian republic. He wants lots of farmers all over the place. To meet that end, Thomas Jefferson in 1803 buys a huge chunk of land known as the Louisiana Purchase. And he literally, I don't use that phrase lightly, he literally doubles the size of the United States with the stroke of a pen. He buys all of this territory from the Mississippi there over into kind of the Midwest and purchases it from France and grows the country. He's hoping that having all of this land will help make the nation more wealthy by allowing farmers to expand and allowing everybody to have land. He gets a sweet deal on it. France is broke from fighting the Haitian Revolution, this enslaved uprising in Haiti. So they cut him a sweet deal on Louisiana Purchase. He gets it for $15 million. Yes, that is about $250 million in today's money, but could you imagine for the sweet deal of $250 million getting like several states worth of land? It's a bargain. And it does grow the ability of the United States to have agricultural land. Internationally, Jefferson is also doing important stuff. In 1801 through 1804, the beginning of his presidency, his first term in office here, he gets involved in something known as the Barbary Wars. What am I talking about with this? Well, the Barbary states is what we would now call Northern Africa, like Libya, that area. And the Barbary states were known for their piracy. They had a lot of pirates that would come out of that area. And they would attack ships, any kind of ships, including ships from the United States. So the United States has ships out there in the Mediterranean, it has them out in the Atlantic, and they're being attacked by Barbary pirates. And the only way to stop an attack by the Barbary pirates, to prevent them from trying to get your ship in the first place, was to pay them essentially a bribe. Like you had to pay for protection. And for a little while, the United States is doing this. They're paying the Barbary pirates to leave their ships alone. But Thomas Jefferson gets really annoyed because he's like, well, first of all, we're kind of a broke young nation. I don't really want to be paying pirates to not attack us. And then the pirates raise their price, and Thomas Jefferson says, no, no more of this. I'm done. We can't afford to pay you, and it's kind of making us look weak that we're a new nation and we're paying off pirates to not hurt us. So Jefferson says, no more. We are not going to do this. We're going to fight the Barbary pirates. So he uses that money that he'd been paying to the pirates to grow the size of the United States military, particularly the Navy. And when the Barbary states continue to attack ships, Jefferson orders an attack against them. They score a major, major victory in 1804. They crush the Barbary states, they crush the Barbary pirates. They're able to sign a treaty that prevents the Barbary states from attacking American ships anymore. There's some sporadic harassment of American shipping by some rogue actors in the Barbary states afterwards, but Jefferson's decisive maneuvers do help stop the United States from having to pay protection in that area and from having their ships harassed by pirates. So that's pretty cool. The United States fought pirates in the early 1800s and won. And the Barbary Wars, these conflicts with the Barbary pirates, were something that helped launch the United States into a period of ascendancy where now they're kind of flexing their muscles internationally. They're fighting foreign wars and winning them now. And it might be kind of a small conflict to compare it to some of the others in the future, but it's a pretty good start. It's a president working internationally, being decisive, and helping show that the United States is a growing ascendant power. When we talk next, the next lecture will cover the first really big conflict that the young United States is going to have to face, a really much more decisive one, and that's going to be a second time that they are going to fight Great Britain. So, final question, what were the Barbary Wars? And again, next time we meet, we're going to be talking about a whole other war entirely, but one that is no less important, and probably more so.